Too often, when trying to help people with their finances, they get really, really anxious about making changes. And a lot of it has to do with, as far as I can tell, it's like they put some sort of sense of identity association with how they are managing their money. They identify so strongly that they feel like they're losing part of themselves if they make changes to their finances. I've seen people when, they finally start to get to the point where, hey, you need to set aside part of your budget for investing. You say that to them and they're like, okay, but have I saved enough? Like, am I really to that point? They're like, I've always been such a good saver. I've always been frugal. I don't want to go overboard. I don't want to start spending too much. And learning how to spend is a skill, for sure. Learning how to spend without being overboard. But if you've always been responsible enough and disciplined enough to be a saver, spending a little bit on some investments into your future is still a responsible thing to do, and buying a few nice things for yourself because you actually have gotten to the point in your life where you can does not automatically mean you're going to fall into the deep rabbit hole of being a gambler or something. They identify so strongly with frugality that they view it almost as like a badge of honor, and it becomes like a moral thing for them. Or the opposite direction, oh, I'm just buried under so much debt, I've given up. I've decided, you know what, I'm just gonna live my life, I'm gonna do what I can, and I'll die with a bunch of debt. But at that point, it won't be my problem anymore. And they just feel that way. They're like, oh, why would I marry someone and saddle them with all this debt that I'm gonna die with? And they have given up hope for their future and for their life completely. They've turned it into an identity. It's like they have to find some sort of story to tell themselves to help themselves with the insecurity of dealing with money. And so I've seen it in both directions. The people who have actually, managed and worked hard enough and scrimped and saved to the point where they shouldn't be living like that anymore. And that was meant to be temporary, and now they're supposed to be stepping into a better form of life, and they're just insecure about doing that because they don't want to be a bad person. And part of their identity, part of their morality is tied into that sense of, I'm a responsible, frugal person. I save. And to be honest, I've had to deal with that before in my own life, that I have spent most of my life being a saver and being frugal. When I started to transition into a place of functionality, into a place of I can start investing, that was a little hard for me. And I had to overcome some barriers in knowledge because I grew up in poverty, but also some barriers in I want to still feel like I'm a good person. And I've always felt good about myself when I saved. And so saying I've saved enough feels weird. It feels like, well, how am I continuing to be a good person if I'm not continuing to do this? But it's just because an identity gets attached to how money is being handled. I did this and I had to overcome it, and people I've seen getting help with finances, it's the same thing, except different types of identities attached to the money. And it's really important to understand that money is a tool. It's a way to express. Money is like clothing. You might have to go through periods of your life where the only clothing you can wear is hand-me-downs. The only clothing you can wear is the cheapest possible thing, or else what was free. There are points in life where you don't really get a lot of options in your clothing. But once you start to get to where you can start to choose clothing, you can start to have self-expression. But the clothing isn't your identity. It's just a way of expressing something. It's the same thing with money. The money isn't meant to be attached to your identity, but it can be a useful tool in helping you do more than survive and start to express the things that you want in life, the things that you're in pursuit of, your dreams and your goals. And for the people who have given up, and it seems like it's a lot of younger people, especially, who have given up completely. And I've heard before, like some of them even say stuff like, oh, well, with climate change, why even try? Everything's going to be destroyed anyway, so why would I even bother? Like, the world's coming to an end. What if there's like a nuclear war or something? And they have like an apocalyptic mindset. And they've really, really just given up on not really just themselves, but on the universe as a whole. They've given up on everything because they feel like it's pointless. I feel so sad about that. Like, here's this young person, younger than me, with all this potential, so much potential that it's like brimming to the surface. It's pouring out their ears, and they feel no interest in pursuing any of it because why bother? The world's just gonna end anyway. And it's tragic. And so they spend and just get in debt and get buried in debt because they're not gonna get married, they're not going to pay it, and they're just accepting that that's just how it is. It might be how it is right that second, but it's not how it has to continue to be. When I was growing up, I unfortunately grew up with a lot of negative things. I learned growing up, the bad is on the edge of happening. I had no housing security. My parents went bankrupt 3 times by the time I was 8 years old. I was so used to not having things and to having to lose things that when I finally got a place that I lived in for 10 years straight, I was so grateful to actually have finally gotten some things that I cared about. I had a dishes set that was my dream set of dishes. I had, little statues and knickknacks and stuff. Since when in life have I been allowed to like accumulate stuff or collect things? That was something that I kept trying to do and then kept having to lose it all over and over again. And then after 10 years of living in that place and thinking I'm an adult, this is okay to do, I still lost everything. My possessions went down to enough to fit into a backseat of a car. And so I've had to learn and relearn over and over again in my life how to restart and how to live like the shoe's gonna drop at some point. It's gonna happen, but I'm gonna live like it's not gonna happen. I'm going to be prepared for it happening. I'm going to make some sort of plans and create some sort of attempt to weather the storm, and then I'm going to carry on with my life. That seems to be like a skill that's been not taught to a lot of the younger people that I encounter who are having real financial struggle, and they just have no hope. It's perseverance. But in order to have perseverance, you have to believe that something good could happen. And they genuinely don't. A lot of them that I encounter genuinely don't think something good could happen. And so I have to make it about really small things. 5 years from now, would you want to have this kind of income? Well, then right now, go get that degree that takes 4 years to get and start getting into that career so that you have that income. Like, there were decisions that you could make based on 5 years from now. So I try to make it really, really simple. And instead of saying just 5 years from now, I try to start with 6 months from now, a year from now, because that's a lot less overwhelming for a person who thinks that there's not really any point and that the future doesn't matter. I also really try to make it about tangible things. When I say tangible things, I mean not materialistic. Saying, oh, a house. Younger people, it's like, oh, I would love to have a house, but that's just not reality. And I would love to have a house, but it's not like any corporation's gonna sell the properties that they own and make it so I can get a house. Even if they did that, I wouldn't be able to afford it. They have no hope about having a house. They don't have hope about, what? I could get rid of this student loan. And so I have to make it about something really tangible to them personally. And so I say, a year from now, would you like to be able to do something nice for, say, your mom? Would you like to be able to show your sibling that they could travel? We can do the math on how to get to that thing, and it can help them understand how to do the math on how to get to other things later on in life when maybe some of their circumstances change, or even the world's circumstances change, that life is full of ups and downs, and how things are right now is not indicative of how things will be 10 years from now. Things change. People say, oh, you know, it's so bad right now. 100 years ago, it wasn't like this. 100 years ago, it was the 1920s, and it was about to be the Great Depression. And if you told all the kids who were dancing in the roaring 20s and who were having a freaking good time that 10 years later, they were going to be starving and taking any job, no matter how low it paid, out of desperation, I don't know how many of them would have stopped living the way that they were living, because I don't know how much it could have sunk in. Right now, there's a lot of hopelessness. It seems like a lot of it gets translated into finances, and it just becomes part of their identity, this hopelessness. So they treat their finances like it's hopeless. And I just want to say, things change. The only guarantees in life at all is that you're born, there's change, and then you die. Those are the only guarantees. Everything else is on the table. And yes, that means on the table are some negative emotions, and pain can be hard, and so you might want to avoid it. But by avoiding all the pain, you're also isolating yourself away from all the good. And you're keeping yourself from feeling any of those good, awesome, positive things. The person who's terrified, anticipating like jumping off of, say, an airplane or bungee jumping, you know, that fear is very real. But by not avoiding it, they get the insane rush and adrenaline hit from actually doing it. The person who is scared to do the public speaking, but then actually does it, gets the adrenaline rush afterward of, oh my gosh, I just did that. Push yourself outside of just, this is the narrative of who I am, and think about who you actually wish you could be. When you watch a movie, or you watch a show, or you watch an anime, whatever it is, and you see someone that you admire, that you look at them and you think, wow, that's badass. How can you translate yourself as you are now into taking steps toward being more like that person you admire? What can you do right now that can help you take steps toward having the things that you genuinely want? The real person you want to be, the real kind of life that you want to have. Maybe you can't get all the way to the dream, but you can at least get partway there. You can at least do something. If you think about all the things that you can't have and that you can't do and that you can't accomplish, you're just going to be so overwhelmed, and you're never going to reach any of your potential. Plan like a shoe's going to drop, but live the life you actually want to live. Don't make your finances be attached to the way that you identify yourself. The way that you behave with your finances can help you, or it can hurt you. If you are turning your finances into a way of attaching to your identity, you're doing yourself a massive disservice. You are attaching too much sentiment to an inanimate, made-up, invented thing called money. Money doesn't have feelings. Money somehow becomes this thing we use to express our feelings, but it's just a tool. You can build up some sort of dream, even if it's a small one, and you can start to transition from survival mode into functionality, into financially stable, into I can actually start to execute some of the things I've always wanted. I've dreamt of since I was a little kid of having a swimming pool. I can't afford to buy a house with an in-ground swimming pool, but oh my gosh, I actually could save up, you know, $500 for a nice inflatable pool or something. You know, I always, since I was a little kid, I've always dreamt of going and seeing the Alps. You could save up and you could go. And maybe you're really just buried under so much debt that it's still unfathomable to you to save up for a couple of years for a trip. Maybe you can't go to the Swiss Alps, but you could go to the Rockies. You could save up for a trip to go to the Cascades. You could meet your dreams partway on change, because change is gonna happen whether you choose it or not. But you might as well choose it because then you at least get to experience some of the good that can come from change. Doing nothing is still a choice, and it still leads you somewhere. You matter. Your hopes and dreams matter. And maybe you don't feel like the world is conducive to the dreams that you have, but they still are your dreams. And because of that, they're worth executing. They're worth pursuing. And once you've saved up enough, and once you've built up enough that you could actually start to execute them, don't be so insecure. Have I saved up enough? Really look at your life proportionally and step into some of that good functional life. You don't even have to be at a grandiose place. It's not like I'm the wealthiest person in the world. And yet I still live in so much of a more functional way than so many people that I see that have more money than me. Because I learned how important it is not to make money and the way that you handle money part of your identity. You are not objectively morally better or morally worse because of the way you handle money, but you can be helping yourself or hurting yourself.